Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session. If you don't know, it's a very special one this week. We've got Eliot Higgins, the founder of Bellingcat. He's going to be giving a talk titled Bellingcat and Online Open Source Investigation. So I've really been looking forward to this for quite a while, and I'm really excited it's actually happening. For those of you who have just joined and aren't aware, the session is going to be recorded. And hopefully, if this is okay with Eliot, we can do a little Q&A at the end, if anyone has any questions. Oh, perfect. A big thank you to Max for setting this up.
Hello.
And that's about it. So if everyone's in and ready, I'll hand you guys over to Eliot.
So I'm going to talk to you today about one of Bellingcat's longest running investigations. So I launched Bellingcat in 2014. I'd been doing a blog for 2 years beforehand, and I'd started doing this really as a hobby more than anything. I had no intention that it would become what it is today. And it was really just about, if I'm honest, about arguing with people on the internet and winning. And I was arguing about the conflict in Syria and Libya at the time. Because I'm one of these people who spends far too much time on the internet being angry with other people. But I kind of discovered how you could actually use imagery and information from open sources, in particular ones that were online, such as social media posts or satellite imagery or just anything you can imagine, really, to really understand what was happening in situations all over the world, in particular conflict. And that actually brought us into conflict with Russia, because we did a lot on the conflict in Syria where they were involved. The downing of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 was the first really big Bellingcat story where they were also involved. And then in 2018, we started looking into another story about the GRU and the poisoning of Yulia and Sergei Skripal in Salisbury, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So they had gone from their home to a restaurant, and at the restaurant they started feeling unwell, and from there they went to a park bench where they collapsed and they were discovered, and they were examined, and it was discovered that they'd been poisoned by a nerve agent. So the suspicion was on Russia because Sergei Skripal was a former Russian spy who had defected to the UK and was now living in Salisbury. And unfortunately, a few months later, Charlie Rhodey discovered a bottle of perfume he was dumpster diving and found a bottle of unopened perfume, which he gave to his girlfriend, Dawn Sturgis. She applied it to her wrist and then fairly rapidly died from nerve agent poisoning, because that perfume box was actually used to smuggle some Novichok into the country, and that's what it contained. What's interesting about this perfume box was it was unopened and unused, which suggested that the people who were involved had more than one basically drop point for these different perfume bottles filled with poison, or they disposed one whilst they were there because it was found in a bin. So we didn't really, as Bellingcat, we didn't really have much to go on at that point. So we were in a way kind of ignoring the story because there was nothing we could really do about it. But then later on in 2018, two individuals were identified by British authorities as being the key suspects, Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Bosharov. And at this point, we were kind of interested in what was happening, but still we didn't really have a way in. And what happened is, quite soon after their identities were published, within a day or two, a Russian news site acquired the flight manifest for the flight they were on when they flew into the UK. And it included details like their full names, their date of births, and their passport numbers. And we decided to start looking into them. And one of my colleagues, Christo Grozov, he's actually a volunteer at Bellingcat. He has a hobby of looking into Russian spy activity. It's just something he's really interested in. And he was familiar with some kind of earlier cases of Russian spy activity in Europe. And he'd also been collecting leaked databases from the Russian government of things like car registrations, house registrations, and other details. In Russia, you have basically a huge black market for data that's usually only available to governments. So you can kind of look back, 10, 15 years where you could go to like a car boot sale in Russia and buy a DVD with the government's kind of Moscow housing database in it. And these would eventually end up online and just floating all over the place. You could also find people on internet forums who were selling access to some of this information. And Christo started using this information to start piecing together who these people were. One of the first things he did is we, of course, looked at the routes they took on the day. There were some interesting features here because you'll see on the right-hand side this Fisherton Street. And if you know their interview with them, they said they'd gone to Salisbury to visit the very famous 123-meter spire on the cathedral. And if you actually look at that location, which you can see here, and go to Street View, you can see actually the cathedral in the distance, and they're actually walking in the opposite direction of it. So they're, obviously not very good tourists if they were looking for Salisbury Cathedral. So this again was quite suspicious. So we started looking at them, and we started getting information from all kinds of different sources. Common stuff we use in open source investigation, web searches, social media searches. They were complete ghosts. They just didn't exist anywhere. We can also use messenger apps and phone sharing apps where some of them automatically populate names when you actually type in a phone number. You might use some yourself, but there's others like Get Contact and Truecaller, which use Russian phone numbers in particular. And they're quite interesting because what will happen is someone will get someone's phone number, put it on their app, and then they'll type in the person's name. That then gets to basically a centralized contact list. So if you add the phone number to your phone and you're a separate person, it's automatically populated. What's quite interesting there is sometimes if you're a guy who's just met someone from the Russian intelligence services, you might put GRU or FSB at the end of it. So when we put that person's phone number in, it pops up with, Sergey FSB and that kind of thing. It seems ridiculous, but it happens more than you would imagine. Other things we did were reverse image searches. We used kind of forensic face comparison, if possible. We looked at government registries like the ones leaked from Russia's. There were leaked email archives that were available. All this different kind of information that we kind of examined to see if we could figure out who these people were. One thing we did get, we managed to purchase the flight records and the booking data of these two individuals. And what you're seeing here are the booking details for the flight they went on. And when they appeared on Russia Today, they were implying that they were tourists going on a long planned trip to Salisbury. But what you're seeing here is, first of all, at the top, on the 1st of March, when they made their online booking. And they flew, which you can see on the next day, the following morning. So they booked it the night before and then flew on the following morning, both of them. So this showed that this was not a long planned trip, but something they did at very short notice. Something else that popped out were their passport numbers. So one passport number ended 297 and the other one ended 294. They were only 3 numbers apart. For 2 individuals to have a passport number only 3 numbers apart is ridiculous. It's just not going to happen. It can't be more than chance that would ever happen. So that made them look incredibly suspicious. And what we were able to do then is also using these places where you could buy information from anywhere in Russia, we acquired their domestic passport forms. Now, these are forms that are used when you're applying for a domestic passport in Russia, which allows you to move to various Russian territories that are not connected by lands to the rest of Russia. And usually when you get these forms, you have to fill in a lot of information, including your name, address, and your previous passport details. But this one was really unusual for a number of reasons. It did contain all his biographical details, but and we could see it was the same person. We actually had facial recognition, forensic analysis done of this. But you could look at something for looking at his right ear, you'll notice it has the same shape, or the mole that's also visible on his chin and on the 2 moles on his chin are also visible. So when we're doing this kind of matching, we can kind of use algorithms and stuff to check it, but we're also looking for those kind of very visual features as well. And ears are actually surprisingly good for identifying people. And this is the other suspect. And as you can see, although this was taken quite some time earlier, you can see the similar features, even though there's a beard. You can also see the ear shape again, which is a personal obsession of mine, is also the same. Now, what was interesting is on the second page of these documents, you usually have all the details of the old passport. And weirdly, these 2 guys didn't have any details on them whatsoever. And the only line there was that the passport had been lost in both cases. So both these guys mysteriously lost their passports. Also, there was this stamp on there. And if you Google that number, what you get is the phone number of the Russian Ministry of Defense, which is a very unusual thing to have on anyone's domestic passport form. So these guys started to get more and more suspicious. So we wanted to know who they were. We got their travel records as well, and could see they were flying back and forth from Moscow on trips all over Europe. So, and also in Israel. So we were keen to find out even more about who these people were. They were very busy boys by the looks of it. Now, the first clue was an event that took place in Montenegro some time ago, where there was an attempted coup. It failed and a lot of equipment was seized. But along with that equipment was information, including the identity documents of one of the individuals arrested. And what was interesting about these identity documents, they were for the same person, but they were different identities. And one appeared to be his real identity and one appeared to be his fake identity. But there were some similarities. They had the same first name. The second and third names were also very, very similar. They also had the same birth date and the same place of birth, which is very unusual for two different people. So Christo was looking at this. He had looked into this earlier, and he kind of was a bit obsessed with it. And he thought, well, maybe this is our way to discover who these people are, because we've been looking these guys upon the leaked databases, and we had, for example, a database from 2013 where the two suspects with their fake identities appeared. But in 2012, on the same database, but an earlier version of it, those people didn't exist. And it was the same for multiple different types of databases, where in 2012 they didn't exist, and then in 2013 they did exist, which again pointed to fake identities. So Christo decided to start searching for everyone on all the databases he had, which had the same first name, the same date of birth, and the same place of birth. And that rapidly reduced the number of people there were. Something that was also interesting about this guy is his passport number on his fake identity was only, again, about 20 numbers different from the other passports. So there seemed to be a pattern here. It also indicated to us that everyone between the numbers 294 to 323 would probably be traveling on a fake identity. So we started looking into Petrov. We had his biographical details. So St. Petersburg was his place of birth. We had his first name and his patronymic, his kind of middle name, named after his father. And we started searching for this on various databases. We looked at this 2013 St. Petersburg resident database, for example, and we found an Alexander Mishkin who had the same date of birth. So we started digging into him. It was interesting because he had registered his house at a street that was very interesting. And also he had a phone number that was registered there as well. We searched that phone number and found more details about him on other databases, including the fact he was living across the road from the St. Petersburg Military Medical Academy, and that address he had was basically their halls of residence. And it seemed that this guy, Alexander Mishkin, had been training as a medical doctor for the military. So we also discovered, using the phone number on an online phone directory, which provided more biographical details. We then used that to search for him in a car insurance database. That led us to his make and model of car, a Volvo XC90, and other details. And we then looked at that at a later car registration database, where we showed that in 2012 he had lived in St. Petersburg, where the medical academy is. But in 2013, the registration for the car had changed to Moscow, to this district and this address. And that's interesting because that address is the headquarters of the GRU. Now, if we look in the 2014 car registration database, again, the address turns up, which is the GRU headquarters. Now, you might think, why would someone register their car to the GRU headquarters if they were a spy? That seems a bit silly. Well, funnily enough, a couple of years ago after the Skripal poisoning, there were a number of people arrested in the Netherlands trying to hack into the Wi-Fi network of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, and they were identified as Russian spies. And when we actually looked into these guys, we discovered that they had all registered, because their IDs were published online along with pictures of their faces. We had discovered they'd all registered their cars at the same building in St. Petersburg, which was the GRU headquarters. And using the car registration databases, we decided to search for every single person who registered a car there. And we found 305 people who had registered their car to the GRU headquarters. And we believe the reason this is, it means that if you get pulled over and you're drunk driving, or your lights out or whatever, and the police officer looks up your phone, your car registration, the first result he gets is the headquarters of the GRU, and he knows not to mess with you, backs off. And we're thinking it's basically so they can get away from paying fines and do illegal parking and stuff like that. But it also means that if you have the leaked databases, it just gives you a list of 305 GRU operatives. And I should stress the GRU is the Foreign Intelligence Service. So we're going back to Alexander. He's working at the St. Petersburg Military Medical Academy. And we managed to get an earlier ID document, again from one of these kind of data brokers, that showed a much younger version of him, and we went to the University of Bradford, used various facial recognition technology to match the two faces, and they gave a very high probability of match. I believe it's over 70% is a strong match, so getting around 90% is an extremely strong match. So we confirmed that, in fact, that he was actually a serving GRU officer, not a tourist selling sports nutrition drinks, as he claimed, visiting Salisbury. And we actually found out where his hometown was. And this is Russia, and this is where his hometown is. It's small. That brown stuff is mud. There's basically no proper roads there. It's basically swampland, and during the winter months, that's the only time you can drive around. During the summer months, you actually have to take a train in and out. And we actually had one of our colleagues from a newspaper called The Insider in Russia travel there and have a look around. And this is what it looks like. So it's like really just the middle of nowhere in Russia. And that was actually quite useful, because this guy we were looking into, who was one of the Skripal suspects, was the local hero, because he had been awarded a Hero of Russia award, the highest honor you could get in Russia, for his activities during the conflict in Ukraine. We don't know exactly what it was for, but speaking to locals, it was apparently a top secret mission, and that he had actually been given the award from President Putin himself. And his grandmother lived in the village and had a photo that she was actually showing people, but she didn't show the reporter, but she was very proud of him. But this just gives you the ideas of the condition in that location. This is the preferred method of transport in that town. So and it was quite scary, because the reporter we were working with, there's a train in the morning and a train out in the evening. And we knew he went in the morning, and this is not a place where you can get 4G. So we just lost contact with him for the entire day until he emerged online coming out of this place on the train. And that was very nerve-wracking, because he was going there to basically hunt down the real family behind this spy. So Ruslan Bosharov, unfortunately, the same strategy didn't work for Ruslan, because we used the same kind of thing. So we started actually creating a profile of what he was like. So we thought, well, he's a GRU officer, and he must have a focus on Western Europe. Looking at his age, it would have been graduation in the 2000s. So we're looking for a school with the best reputation for foreign operations, which was a Far Eastern Military Command Academy. So we started looking through and looking at photographs shared by people online. This was one guy who we thought maybe it's the same person. It turned out it wasn't in the end, but I'm showing you all the times when we get stuff right, and it's not like that every time. Sometimes you have to spend a long time digging through a lot of stuff, and we did with this guy. But we also discovered there were 7 graduates who were given the Hero of Russia award. So we're thinking, well, maybe they're both heroes of Russia. And we discovered one of them, there were 6 of them we could find photographs of. One of them we couldn't find any information about whatsoever, Colonel Anatoly Shapiga. So we started looking into him. So we started basically doing searches for all these different combinations of words in Russian, hoping we could find some match. And we discovered him in a 2003 residential database, and he had registered to a military unit, which was the Spetsnaz unit of the GRU's 14th Brigade, which confirmed that this guy was a GRU officer, but we still needed to prove this was the same guy in the Skripal case. So we looked in the residential database, we got his details, we looked at the passport form again, and we discovered that there were some matches. And we actually discovered that we got passport details for this guy, and which you can see in the middle, and that's his passport photograph, which again, we had recognition done to prove it was the same person, and again, prove this was the person we were looking for. So we identified 2 serving GRU agents. And we did this within about a month of kind of that first bit of information coming about from their identities. Later, we would find photographs. This is from his military unit. Some people went there and posted photographs of what they saw on Facebook. They have like a military museum, and he was listed there under a name with a photograph. And after we published this, that photograph was taken down. We also found out that Putin also awarded him the Hero of Russia award, as he does with many other people. Here's another example of him doing that, which was interesting, because Putin actually said that no one knew who they were, and he's sure they were just some kind of innocent guys, but he'd actually met them. Later on, a new piece of evidence emerged. There was a 3rd individual who'd been traveling around the same date as the Skripal suspects. He actually had a similar passport number as the other 2 guys. So he kind of raised a red flag with us, this Sergei Fedotov. So we knew he flew there just before the Scribble suspects did. He had the passport number that was close to the other ones. We got his passport datas and travel datas for 7 years. And again, this is using these online brokers of data that are basically using contacts to get information from government databases, because Russia is corrupt top from bottom. We got other data like border crossing data, the passenger name record data, the Russian police passenger monitoring system data, everything we could about this guy and where he'd been. So we got his date of birth, and we started then doing our usual trick, looking for a guy who could be a match. We found his full name on these databases, but this was still a fake identity. So it also listed his place of birth, but in the actual residential database for his place of birth, no person existed. He also worked for a company that existed on paper, but it never actually traded, which also suggested it was a company being used for basically fake visa applications where he pretended he had a real job, but it didn't really. We actually found the home address, but when we went to the home address, there was a different family living there who's had no idea who he was. So this was clearly a fake identity that he was traveling under. So we got his passport file. It was issued by the same passport desk, 77001, that issued the other passports. And this is the one that's basically used for VIPs and other very important cases. And again, the issue really is where the second page was blank was the same as Boshrov and Petrov. And also the previous passport number that he supposedly was issued just didn't exist. So we got his domestic passport data, and there were no records for him. This was very unusual. It appears the Russians had gone in and deleted the passport data for him that we expected to be there. And we actually had someone else confirm that just to be sure. So this was the first sign that the Russians were taking notice of what we were doing and trying to stop us from doing it. We also discovered because we had that sequence of passports and we thought we'd check them out and see if there were any more of these photos there. But when we actually went in, all of those identities in that sequence of passports, from the first Skripal suspect to the guy arrested in Montenegro through the coup, and every number between, had their passport photographs removed. And there's only one way that could have happened is that there was state involvement, because these are government databases. So they're going back and scrubbing out all this data that we've been using in our investigations. So we concluded that the data was being purged from the databases. But using a source, we managed to get this very blurry photograph that was taken when he was going through a passport gate on one of his travels. And if you've gone through those automated gates, you put your passport down, it scans it, and we got this image from his scan. Not very good quality, so we still had to start finding his real identity. So we used the process we did before. We started looking for varieties and variations of who he could be, but the first few times we found no one, but we got one finally by using his middle name with the same date of birth. It gave us 15 results and one likely candidate, Denis Sergeyev. So we started looking into him, and we discovered he had registered his name to this location, which was the dormitory of the GRU's Military Diplomatic Academy. So this guy was a GRU agent. And we went through just tons of material. This took a really long time, but we found an old documentary from a conflict that took place 30 years ago that was posted on YouTube, and found the guy we're looking for in the video, 30 years younger, but here he is. And we actually, again, did this facial recognition. I got a 78.2% match with him, even though the image quality was quite poor. Again, if you look at the ears, you'll see the right one's poking out more than the left one is, and those kind of details. But we, again, conferred there was this third suspect, and he was really interesting because we got his travel records, and we could see, again, he was flying all over the place. Like in 2014, he flew to Prague with Alexander Mishkin. But there was one that really stood out. There was one where he visited Bulgaria. And that was interesting because at the same time he visited Bulgaria, Emilian Gebrev, an arms dealer in Bulgaria, fell mysteriously ill. And so did his business partner and his son. And the local authorities said that they thought it was a case of food poisoning, but he got ill enough that I believe he fell into a coma. He was seriously ill. So it was quite a severe case of food poisoning if that was the case. So we started looking into this, and we discovered that not only did this third suspect travel and basically and follow this guy around, but so did 8 other GRU officers who identified, because one thing we were able to do is, alongside all these travel records, is get their phone records. And those phone records contain not only the phone numbers they were calling, which allowed us to identify GRU officers and get their travel records and show they'd followed this guy, but also every cell phone tower they've been connecting to. So one thing we did discover is there was this is from the day of the Gebrev poisoning in Bulgaria. This is the parking garage where the guys parked, and this guy walked into the parking garage. We don't know who he is, but you'll notice he's wearing a hat that's pulled down. It looks like he's got sunglasses on, black gloves, and he walks up to a car, and it's Gebrev's car that's parked in the parking garage, and then he disappears beside it. He goes off camera for a bit, and then he comes back, and as he's walking away from the car, he's looking back at the car. And we believe this is actually the moment when the poison was applied to the car door handle. So this actually resulted in the British authorities getting in contact with the Bulgarian authorities and basically forcing them to reopen the case. One thing that was very mysterious is when we were looking into this, we were talking to Gebrev, and he told us that his basically biological samples had been sent off to a lab called Verifin, which is a OPCW registered laboratory, and it tested and found some very unusual byproducts that indicated that he'd been exposed to some sort of organophosphate, which would either be basically a nerve agent or basically a thing for killing insects. And when we went back and asked if we could find out more about these samples, which should have been taken saved for 5 years, they couldn't find them. They'd disappeared from their laboratory. So that was a mystery. So back to this third Skripal suspect. This map represents every single time his phone connected to a cell phone tower. And each one of those numbers is basically how many times it made a connection. So, 21 times, 25 times. And we could track him from the airport where he landed all the way into where he was staying in London. What was really interesting as well in his phone data is he was calling up people just before the poisoning who worked in this place, the SC Signal Laboratory, which is supposedly manufacturing sports nutrition drinks. But he was phoning up people in the laboratory who had interesting backgrounds. They were all scientists who had been working on Russia's Novichok program that had been shut down quite some years earlier when Russia joined the Chemical Weapons Convention. And he had been calling them very regularly, including repeatedly on the day of the poisoning, and then just stopped calling them after the poisoning took place. And it seems that Russia, when they shut down the chemical weapons program, actually just moved all the scientists to a new laboratory and pretended they were working on a completely different topic. So we then kind of accidentally stumbled across Russia's secret chemical weapons program. And then that became relevant because in August 2020, Russian opposition leader Navalny was mysteriously poisoned. Is a very famous case. So we decided to look up the phone records of these scientists working at SC Signal, who we knew were part of the Novichok program. And it turns out they'd been calling these guys very regularly just before the poisoning. And these guys had been following Navalny, not just on the day he was poisoned, but on 40 separate trips. And we discovered they were part of a FSB kill team, basically. And they've been contacting this Novichok lab on a very regular occasion and following him on many, many trips. So this is just a representation of some of the trips that he was followed on. So the white line is Navalny, and all these colored lines are different members of this team, basically following him all these trips. He was only ever followed when he was staying somewhere overnight. If it was like a day trip, they wouldn't bother following him. And these are the trips that occurred around the time that he was poisoned. What was interesting is after they poisoned him, they all went to this same location. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, but they all traveled to the same location, seemingly for a debrief after the operation. We, in fact, also with their telephone metadata, which again, we just purchased from Russian data brokers because it's just freely available. And it's not like we go to them saying, hey, do you have this FSB officer's details? We say, we've got this number, came here for the last 3 months of travel records, and then we get them. And it's a big spreadsheet. Sometimes it's just like literally just printed out. So we have to manually type it into a spreadsheet, which is irritating. But this showed he was just 6 minutes drive, one of the suspects, from the hotel where Navalny was staying on the night before he was poisoned. We also discovered there were more poisonings because this same team had followed other people. So we had on the left-hand side here is a Russian opposition leader from the official Russian opposition, the allowed opposition from the anti-corruption party, who was starting to make some waves and then fell mysteriously ill and died. The two guys on the right were actually activists from the Caucasus regions who were not big names. They were just quite minor people who are looking at stuff like language rights and stuff like that. And they died under mysterious circumstances. In fact, the FSB forensics unit, which investigated more on the murders, was actually the same unit where the poisoning team is operating from. So they investigated their own assassination and said it wasn't a murder. We also looked into this Vladimir Kara-Murza, who's a major Russian opposition figure. He was a friend of Boris Nemtsov, who was assassinated a few years ago. And he fell into a coma in 2015 and again in 2017 after falling mysteriously ill. And both those trips, the same FSB team had been following him up until the point he'd been poisoned. So what we've discovered, going from the Skripals to finding this chemical weapons lab to what we're discovering now is basically a systematic program of Russian assassinations of domestic opposition figures. And we've published now on 5 of these assassination cases, Navalny, the 3 guys who were killed, in Vladimir Kara-Murza. We've got at least 4 more that we'll be publishing on at some point. And we're still just finding more and more all the time. And it's really quite a frightening scale of basically murder sanctioned by the Russian state. And these are teams that are linked to the highest levels of the Kremlin as well. So we discovered this basically because Russia has information that's freely available and that anyone really could go and get it. Because when we published this, we knew that we would be immediately accused of working for the CIA or MI5 or MI6 because Russia's done that to us before. So we basically then explained exactly how we did it, what kind of sources we were using. And then Russian news agencies, after seeing our report, tested what we were doing. They bought the same data from the same kind of data brokers and confirmed exactly what we were saying about this data. So that's Bellingcat. And I'm happy to take any questions you've got.
Oh, wow. So that was incredible. Thank you very much for giving that talk. It's amazing seeing sort of the power of open source intelligence and what you can achieve from it. So yeah, thank you for giving that talk. I'm pretty sure loads of people have got questions. So if anyone wants to go ahead, just go
Yeah,
on.
can I go?
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
got two. I got 2 questions. The first one is, how do you organize yourself? Because you've got so much data coming in from so many different sources. It's quite easy to get lost in in all the data. How do you organize it all? And also, have you or any of your team ever have you ever feared for your life?
So the organization, a lot of it comes down to basically one person doing the majority of the work and just having it all in their head, because it is so vastly complicated. I mean, we've got terabytes of databases in different kinds of formats. We're actually trying at the moment to try and get all the databases kind of talking to each other, because there's this pattern of behavior that we've identified, which I explained in the presentation, that we think we can kind of automate the discovery of and basically make something that allows us to discover Russian spies' secrets, identities automatically. But it varies from project to project as well. I mean, for example, at the moment, we're doing a big project on the January 6th violence in Washington, D.C. And there, basically, we just have a giant Google sheet that we're all working off with about 1,000 videos on it that we're kind of then putting into other sheets that we're then organizing into timelines and other details. I mean, it's quite disorganized and random. The thing is, there's never really very rarely you go from one project to another project where you work in the same way. But one thing we are doing more and more now, because this kind of work is getting the interest of the likes of the International Criminal Court, and there's questions of using open source information as evidence. We're developing processes now that are focused on using basically a systemized process for archiving and investigation, and with the aim of it actually being used in courts. We actually had a mock trial with a judge from the ICC a few weeks ago, where we were actually cross-examined using one of our case studies, which was quite scary. And we were using that to see if our process we've developed, which was at that point being used on Saudi airstrikes in Yemen, to a point where it can actually kind of be deployed and shared with other organizations. And that's kind of just one approach to analyzing like airstrikes, for example, specific conflict incidents. But you kind of almost have to have a bespoke investigation process for every investigation, because you're always dealing with different kinds of data and information. But once you've done it enough, you start seeing certain similarities. So you can kind of create some systems. Fear for my life. Yeah, I think that would be fair. It's like it's got worse because we've had a lot of pushback from the Russian Federation since we did our first work on an MH17. From about 2015 onwards, we started getting, first of all, a lot of criticism in the Russian media. Sputnik, Russia Today, and various Russian outlets kind of doing stuff. In one case, Russia Today sent someone to Leicester, and they decided to track me down. So they went to my accountant's office and was demanding to see where I was. And the poor receptionist there didn't have a clue what was going on. Then they went to my office building where I was like renting one room in the back off New Walk, just like the tiny room, and I wasn't there. And they knew I wasn't there because they had direct messaged me in the morning saying they were coming to film something at the Diwali festival, which wasn't happening for a month, and I knew they were lying. So I said, no, I'm not going to meet you. And they went to the office so they could film a bit where they wouldn't find me. And then they went to my old house in Leicester, which my brother lives in now. And my mum was visiting that day, and they doorstepped my mother for a piece of Russia Today. So that was quite irritating. And it's been constant. And as I was saying before we started, I mean, it's got to the point now where I've gone from being described as like an amateur who don't know what I'm doing to an MI6 agent to, last week there was an article saying that I didn't even actually exist. I was just made up by the British authorities. Alongside that, we've also had Russian officials start criticizing us. After the Skripal poisoning stuff we were doing, we had the Russian ambassador to the UK give a press conference where he repeatedly said that we were working for the British deep establishment and that we were paid for by the intelligence services. But when a journalist asked what evidence he had, he was like, "Oh, I can't. We just have a feeling. I can't show you anything," which is a very kind of Russian response to that kind of question. And then because of that, I'm now being contacted by British counterterrorism police who check in on me regularly to make sure that nothing bad is going to happen to me and that if we've got any concerns. But on the other side, you don't have to just worry about the Russians. You also have to worry about the people on the internet who have decided that you're a bad person because you're a NATO warmonger or you're part of the CIA or MI6. And within there's quite active communities that do that, and within that you'll find people who are quite aggressive sometimes, and they will kind of turn up at events and try and make a scene, and that can be quite difficult when you're not sure which one of those people are the ones who's decided to bring a knife with them that day to sort you out. So yeah, it does happen, and it ruins my trips to hotels as well because I can't eat food in hotels anymore. I can't get room service because I just get too worried about some kind of recently employed Russian waiter putting something in my food. So now I have to go to the supermarket at any hotel I stay in and buy some sandwiches.
That's crazy. Thank you for that.
Scary, that is.
Yeah, about that.
That's pretty terrifying.
Damn.
I've got a couple of questions, and I've tried to limit these as much as possible, so I'll try and keep it short. So I'm a big fan of the podcast, and my favorite thing I've seen in the podcast was when someone was able to chronolocate someone using their shadow. With things like that there in mind, like what's the most nuts thing that you've seen someone do to try and get information? Like turning someone into sundial is just wacky. Like I think it's the craziest. Oh.
That's a good question. I mean, there's so much. We did something. One that's kind of maybe more horrific than wacky. We were looking into. There's this case in the International Criminal Court of a guy called Wafali, who was a brigade commander in Libya, around Benghazi, and he had started posting videos on Facebook showing executions of people he said were basically ISIS fighters fighting in Libya. But he had posted 6 of these videos online, and the last one he posted online was literally rows of people in orange jumpsuits he ordered his men to execute. And we geolocated that. And the one thing that confirmed the location is when you go to satellite imagery of that location on Google Earth, you can actually see the bloodstains from the executions. And you can actually move the camera position in Google Earth and match it up absolutely perfectly with the bloodstains that are visible in the video. And it's just one, and that's been done more than once. There was an ISIS execution where they lined people up on a airstrip and executed them. And the next day on the satellite imagery, you could actually see the kind of bloodstains that were kind of just lined up, just confirming the location of these killings. One that's less grim. I helped rescue a dog last year. That's nice. There was a stolen dog, and a group called Lost Dog contacted me, and they had all they had was a piece of CCTV footage with a very blurry number plate on it. And one of my colleagues, Timmy Allen, he really loves kind of all the tech stuff, and he developed a system to use machine learning to decipher number plates. And he did that on the number plate, and we got the correct number plate, gave it to the police. They went round to the house of the owner, and the dog was in the backyard barking away. But Timmy had actually developed that for finding a police murderer in Ukraine. So one thing I'd like to always do is explain to people when we're doing training is that a tool that's developed for one thing can be used in very different circumstances. So that's kind of like another example of that. But there's always kind of just all these kind of weird little things that people do. They like see some, using reflections is often quite good. Seeing stuff that, there's actually a stalker in, I think it was South Korea, who used the reflections in an Instagram photograph of one of their kind of idols to hunt them down and kill them. So it can be used for bad stuff as well. But there's a whole variety of things you can do with, just this information. You share a lot more online than you can possibly imagine, even in the smallest details of photographs. Oh, I've got a really good one, actually. Dogs again. We actually used, we were looking at Russian soldiers who were going over to Ukraine. And we discovered there was an army camp where they weren't tagging their photographs to it, but they were posing with the camp mascots, which were two huskies, and they had very unique patterns in their fur. So you could tell they were the same huskies in all the photographs, even though these photographs weren't being shared, kind of geotagged anywhere. So you could confirm all the soldiers who were going over to Ukraine based off these huskies.
That's like nuts. Like the fact that you can do this and can confirm things based off like dogs and like the distinctions between the fur is just crazy.
Yeah, we've actually just done one recently, looking into the illegal wildlife trade in Dubai of like cute tigers, baby tigers and stuff. And part of that again was using the fur patterns to match kind of Instagram posts of people who are posing with these animals with the guys who are actually trading them. Because there's people who will rent like a tiger cub for the morning so they can take Instagram photographs with them. But it's part of a really horrific wildlife trade. But we can link the Instagrammers to this trade by using these fur patterns on the animals.
That's crazy. To go on into a couple of other things, if you were to go back before you started Bellingcat, would you do anything differently? Like, would you not use your real name so that people couldn't potentially find your family home and things like that there? Or would you still do it the same way for the same experience that you've had?
I think part of what we do is you have to be quite transparent about everything, not just the evidence and the investigation process, which is core of what Bellingcat is, but also who we are. Because I've been accused of being all kinds of different things. I work apparently for every intelligence agency in the world, according to some people. So it's kind of like why I wrote the book We Are Bellingcat, because I could actually tell my story of where I came from. Because to some people, it just seems like in 2014, suddenly I launched Bellingcat, MH17 was shot down 3 days later, and we suddenly became this huge thing around MH17, and that's made people suspicious. But that was based off 2 years of me basically doing a blog, which I'd started as a hobby. And it just turned into this kind of whole I kind of stumbled into this way of doing an investigation, and this kind of community grew around me. I got to know journalists and people who knew my work. So when I launched Bellingcat and MH17 was shut down, there was always that kind of trust built already among journalists. And to some people, because they didn't know that, it just seemed all of a sudden journalists were trusting a random blog, and it made them really suspicious. And of course, people on the internet are often very suspicious of things they don't understand. So being really transparent about who we are and what we do is key. But the thing is, I don't think I would change anything. Maybe there's a few times I've said stuff on Twitter in arguments that I shouldn't have said because they ended up in Russia Today articles. But generally, it's had to happen in the way it's happened, just because of the weird nature of this kind of field of investigation. It's very unusual for there to be, online open source investigation is something that's very new. It's something that couldn't have existed before, say, 2006, really, in the way it does now, because you had smartphones coming out that led to an increase in the amount of social media use, the amount of information that was available, platforms like Google Street View and Google Earth providing reference imagery that just didn't exist. And it was kind of amateurs accidentally falling into using it that created this entire field of investigation, because the bigger organizations just didn't do it first, basically. And I kind of just did it as a hobby, and it turned into a whole thing. And it couldn't have really, for me, happened any other way.
Okay, thank you. And just my last question, is there any way for us to be able to get involved with Bellingcat, like to volunteer or anything like that there? Or is it now just you hire people and you have to like apply to work for Bellingcat?
So what we're doing at the moment is we're working on developing a volunteer section, because we do have a big community around Bellingcat of people who kind of get involved with stuff and volunteer their time, but it's kind of coordinated mainly through Twitter, which isn't very good basically for doing that kind of thing. So we're creating a kind of platform where people can come and know they've got tasks that they can do. For example, we'll say, can you geolocate this video? I mean, if you follow us on things like Twitter as well, we'll sometimes ask, a good example is the Europol Trace and Object Stop Child Abuse campaign, where Europol has asked members of the public to look at objects that have been cut out of abuse imagery, like bottles of shampoo, clothing, and ask what they are. And we've been amplifying that to our kind of community, which is, a few 100,000 people, and that's had really great results. And that's a way you can get involved. It's not like a complicated thing to do. It's looking at a picture. But that has led to, children being rescued, paedophiles being arrested, because people are just looking at pictures on the internet and taking that moment. And that's the way you can also get involved. But also what we're trying to do as well in the future is education, and getting involved, with people earlier and earlier is important to us, because one, this is, these skills are really useful in a variety of ways. Two, it's actually really enjoyable to do if you get into it. And three, you can actually have really big impact. You don't have to be someone from a professional background to do it. I started this when I was doing just like admin work and stuff. So, and I just figured out how to do it myself. So if I can do it, certainly anyone at university level can do it. And we're hoping even eventually to go into kind of schools and do pop-up newsrooms for 16 to 18-year-olds to look into local issues. And also, don't think open source investigation is about war, conflict, and all the big stuff happening in the world. It can be something that's happening locally. I mean, do an open source investigation into stuff that's happening in Leicester that might be interesting to you. That might be actually a good place to start.
Thank you very much.
I got another one. Have you been forced to, or accidentally, learned another language now, like Russian? Because surely, if you're around it, you're doing so much investigations into it, and you're looking at all these documents. Have you picked up a fair bit of Russian?
I'm terrible at languages. My wife's Turkish, and if I learn any language but Turkish before first, I'll be in so much trouble. So the thing is, first we started off with Syria, where it was kind of Arabic. But I was kind of more focused on the weapons being used, because I didn't speak a word of Arabic, or could learn, didn't have the time to learn it. And then I just had a community of Arabic speakers kind of get involved, so I could kind of ask them questions if I needed to do it. And now with Russia, we have Russian speakers working for Bellingcat. And the thing is, when you're moving from topic to topic, as I often am in my kind of role at Bellingcat at the moment, because it's gone from like Bellingcat, when it was launched, was kickstarted for £60,000. And I was the only employee. And now we've kind of doubled in size every year, and we have 20 full-time employees. And we're a registered foundation in the Netherlands with charity status. So we've changed very much as an organization. So my role used to be doing everything, but now I'm in a kind of creative development role for Bellingcat. So making sure those areas where we're trying to move into, like justice and accountability and education and tech, are kind of focused on and developed really well. Plus the work we're doing now, setting up a production company to turn our investigations into film and television documentaries, plus probably drama series as well. So for me, it's kind of like I've gone past the point of needing to learn a language, because I've got kind of staff to do it for me, but I also have to learn Turkish first, otherwise I'll be in trouble.
Oh, that's really awesome. Has anyone got any other questions?
If you don't want to, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right. No, sorry, go on, Chris.
I was just gonna say, if anyone's got any questions they don't want to say them out loud, just put them in the general chat.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask about the ear fetish, but we'll talk about that one later, maybe. Yeah, no, I mean, on the black market data sets that you were saying that you'd sort of managed to get your hands on, I don't know. I was going to ask about sort of, obviously, I mean, Chris kind of already sort of brushed up on this, in that obviously I'd be fearing that I'd get prosecuted, I suppose, by the Russian state, or even more, having sort of accessed this stuff. I guess my question is sort of, is that something that's unique to Russia, or surely you must be aware of other sort of countries that we might perceive as being less corrupt, but actually this kind of thing goes on, the sort of data brokerage goes on as well. So I guess my question is sort of, what's your experience of sort of data brokerage been, and just if you could talk a little bit about sort of how pervasive it is, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, it's something that's pretty uniquely Russian. You don't get anywhere at the level of this anywhere else. I mean, you do have, like in the UK, where you would have private detectives who knew people in the police who would work for newspapers to get information, and that's where a lot of this UK phone hacking scandal kind of emerged from in the kind of 2010, 2011 type period. But with the legality of it, I mean, it's not obviously legal for people in Russia to be doing this, but it's just so endemic that it's just been happening for decades, really, because it's just how Russian society has kind of become because of the way, it's basically rotting from the head down all throughout society. For us, from the legal perspective of using this kind of data, we've spoken to lawyers about this quite extensively, and because we work in different countries, we have to be quite careful about this kind of thing. But basically, it's justified because of the severity of the cases and the fact. With the Navalny poisoning, for example, the only people who can investigate that poisoning officially are the Russians. So the Russians are not going to investigate the Navalny poisoning. So then was a situation where the only real way you could actually find out what was happening was by using this data. And we do have kind of like ethical discussions about this, whether it's not okay or not to use this stuff, because we do have like a supervisory board who asks us these questions, so we have to be prepared to have good answers. But really, by using this data, we're exposing Russian spies who are involved in assassination. So
don't worry, you'd have to justify that to me.
It's just it comes up quite a bit as a question, and especially when you're talking to journalists as well, because a traditional news organization would not do this. It would just be unthinkable to buy this kind of information. But also, Bellingcat's a weird hybrid, because we do kind of like acts of journalism, but we're also doing stuff like building cases for international courts and working with this stuff as evidence. Like one of my colleagues at the moment is in Berlin, or has been in court in Berlin, giving evidence as a key witness in FSB murders of these basically kind of former kind of terrorists from Chechnya, but they basically went to Berlin and shot the guy. And that question was actually raised by the judge about using this kind of data and the ethics around it, and they had to have a long conversation in court about it. The judge decided eventually, fortunately, it was okay to do that, but it's something we have to be really careful of, because of course we don't want to break the law and get in trouble ourselves.
You don't want to then be basically
getting
hunted by the feds in Russia. That would be
every way
less than ideal.
I mean, we're actually being sued in Russia at the moment.
I'm not surprised.
But again, that itself is we think the GRU are behind that, because we got these leaked emails before the case started, where the main the guy suing us, who was an MH17 suspect, was basically communicating with a GRU officer, CCing a bunch of lawyers who then ended up suing us. So it's just like we're literally having a show trial in Russia at the moment over this stuff. So it's like quite again another bizarre experience we get to have.
Cheers. Appreciate it.
Oh wow. I have a question. Personally, what do you think was sort of the most exciting discovery of your career during while you're at Bellingcat? Is there anything that sort of made you go, aha, that's it, that's the thing?
I mean, it's quite frequently. I mean, like the first time when we were looking at the Skripal thing, for example, we had no idea we would get this stuff. I mean, when you look into that, it wasn't like, oh, here's how we're going to find the Russian spies. It was more like, oh, I wonder if this will work, and then it works, and then it just works really, really well. And it's like with the Navalny case. Navalny, with my colleague Christo, phoned up one of the suspects and tricked him into giving a full confession by pretending to be a superior's assistant and bullying him into giving a report on what happened. And this guy was like, Navalny was like saying, so why do you think it was going wrong? And this guy was going, oh, well, I think this. And saying, okay, what can I do a performance assessment of your colleagues? What do you think of this colleague and this colleague? And it was 50 minutes long, and we got it all on video as well. It's fantastic. But something like that just was like blowing our minds. If you look at it's on Navalny's YouTube channel, if you watch that video, you'll see Christo and the other people there kind of just freaking out in the background as this guy is just giving like a full confession to a poisoning. And the kind of moments like that are just like unbelievable. And this is what's, especially with this kind of Russia poisoning case, the whole thing, if you wrote it as a novel, no one would believe you. It's that insane. But we've kind of lived it. It's quite good as well, because we're going to turn that into a documentary series and hopefully also turn it into a drama series, because it's such a good story.
That's absolutely insane. It's so cool. like actually managing to do all that, and I can't wait to see this documentary series. Like I'll be as soon as I heard about this, as soon as she said this, I'm really now looking forward to it. Has anyone got any other questions? We're reaching 7 o'clock. I don't know if you wanted to possibly stay and answer a few more questions, Eliot, but obviously, if not, that's okay.
Unfortunately, my kids' bedtime.
That's no worries. No worries. Well, if no one's got any more questions, no. Well, I'd like to really thank you for coming along, Eliot. It's been absolutely fantastic. I've really enjoyed the talk, and I'm sure everyone else has as well.
Hell yeah!
I hope in the future I'll get to come back and maybe tell you more. Maybe when the documentary's out.
Yeah, I'd absolutely love that. Yeah, somebody else would have to organise that. I'll probably be gone by then, but yeah, I'll definitely come along to it anyway. Yeah. Okay, well, that's perfect.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for being here.
Appreciate you taking time.
Thanks for all the questions. Cheers.
Okay, cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.